And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Richard Lawrence, psychic medium, award-winning, international best-selling author, and one of the world's leading authorities on UFOs and their spiritual message. Richard, thanks for joining me today, and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff.
I don't know if you've been watching, but today, literally today, there was a government hearing on UFOs, and I watched about 10 or 20 minutes this morning. Did you catch any of that?
I did. In fact, I stopped to do this podcast with you, but I was sort of towards the end of it, I think. And I stopped at an amazing revelation, actually, Jeff, which I'll share with you. It was put forward by Representative Burleson. I'm not sure if you know him. We wouldn't know him here in England, but he had this film footage of a UFO, or a UAP, they'd like to rename it, don't they now? I think that's all a bit of spin there. But anyway, let's say a UFO. And there was a drone filming it. And this footage is out there. People can check it out, I'm sure. And then the other drone, the American drone, this was over Yemen, by the way, fired what they call a Hellfire missile at this UFO. Hellfire missile can destroy any known tank on Earth, travels at a supersonic speed, and hit the UFO, or appeared to hit the UFO, and then bounced straight off the UFO. And the UFO just carried on. And this is on film footage, and this is from October of last year. Now, that actually conforms with something that Dr. George King, who is my mentor, is a great master of yoga, and I co-authored a book with him called Contacts with the Gods from Space. And he explained in this book, which was published in 1996, a year before his passing, as it turned out, why it is that would happen. Because one thing that came out in this hearing in front of Congress and so on, they don't know how that could possibly happen. How could a Hellfire missile bounce off any object? But Dr. King actually explained it in this book, as I say, published in 1996, and I co-authored it with him, this book. Just read you a couple of lines about UFOs from that book. They are protected by a force field, which is intensified in direct relation to the velocity of the craft. This force field is magnetic in nature. No material body could actually come into contact with the hull of the vessel while the force field is in operation. The force field protects the vessel and the occupants from atmospheric friction. And it goes on into more detail about many other aspects as well, actually. But since this is just like hot off the press, just come out now, I certainly don't know of anybody who has explained this capability of extraterrestrial spacecraft other than Dr. King. And he did it with great authority because he was a contactee. And I know there are a lot of claims out there. I don't believe in all of them by any means, but I know that his was true. And he had that. And that's where people should look, because these government people, these representatives, the Congress, well done them for answering the questions. They're not getting the answers, by the way, and I think they know it. But however, they're asking the questions. But really, to find the answers about these vehicles and why they are here and why they don't land openly and when will they land and what's the reason, what is their plan, for that, you have to go to someone who's been in contact with them.
Well, it's an amazing synchronicity because I saw the same exact footage this morning.
Wow.
And let me play devil's advocate with you. Is it possible that that drone is one of ours?
Right. Well, I would say absolutely and definitely not. And I think also the experts would say that too. They aren't, obviously this is just one hearing, but they weren't professing to understand. I don't think they've even got as far as admitting that this is genuine footage, by the way. But it was produced by a representative in a Congress hearing. So I would say no, because that's one of the things that they've started to do. I mean, I go back a long way, Jeff. I was campaigning for the truth about UFOs to come out from governments 40 years ago. And Dr. King, he was campaigning for this 70 years. Is it 70 years? Well, the 50s. Yeah, I suppose it is 70 years ago. So what's really happened is that they've come up with, first of all, a lot of lies. They completely denied it. They tried to debunk it for decades. In the last 10, 20 years, they've tried to make out that, or if any of this thing is true, because they can't stop it. They can't stop these things being seen. And in the age of phones and so on, mobile phones, it's being filmed, it's being tracked by all kinds of people, and there's many whistleblowers, dozens of whistleblowers coming out of the government and out of the US Navy and elsewhere. So they try and make out it's some kind of, foreign power doing this. And of course, it isn't, because if such foreign powers had powers like that, we'd have seen some indication of them. I mean, I'll just name one other thing that was mentioned by another representative, not today, but previously, but this year, mentioned it this year, that he found out from one of the admirals that extraterrestrial spacecraft, there was a craft the size of a football pitch that was traveling underwater at hundreds of miles an hour. Now, no submarine has got even to 100 miles an hour. So they've definitely got technology. And then when you get onto their multi-dimensional capabilities, such as invisibility, like overcoming sonic boom, never mind being in a place that the US Navy are headed for without being told and getting there before the US Navy, and so on and so forth. There's a technology with mental powers as well, which no government on Earth, no inventory of any military armory could duplicate.
What about Ross Coulthart coming out and saying that the famous Tic Tac video is our tech?
Yeah, well, this is part of the plan. I don't know his lineage. I saw him on one of the footages I saw. They're trying, maybe he's a stooge, maybe he believes it. But I mean, how would he know? What's his qualifications? I wouldn't know how he would know that. And surely if he did know it, he wouldn't be allowed to say it, because otherwise, why aren't they saying it? So, no, I mean, the capabilities, I mean, I'll just give you an instance that I know of, which goes way back to the 70s, actually. And it's in my book, UFOs and the Extraterrestrial Message. It's a CIA paper. People can check it out and find it quite easily, actually. It's probably on the internet, I imagine. And it describes how over Tehran, a UFO was chased by you might know this case. I don't know, Jeff. Chased by a jet.
Was this in the late 70s?
Yeah, late 70s. It was a CIA release under the Freedom of Information Act. I actually brought it over to the UK in, I think, 1980. It's the first time it had been seen over here. And it was chasing this craft. But the interesting thing is that as soon as it got out of range of the craft, it could fire its missile. But when it was in range, its missile capability went dead. The whole weapons control panel went dead, and it couldn't fire. So they were exerting some power. These extraterrestrials were exerting some power over an American jet and its capabilities, which did it no harm at all, allowed it to see it and chase it, but didn't allow it to do any harm to it. And that's a very interesting thing, because frankly, if this was a hostile craft, let's say the one that we saw today was a hostile craft, and it had a Hellfire missile fired at it, which easily just bounced it off it. It would also retaliate, wouldn't it? It wouldn't take that lying down if it was a foreign power, would it? No. These are peaceful, very interesting, highly intelligent beings who are very aware of us, and it's not new. It goes back to I think one of the oldest ever reported in the Ramayana, the Pushpaka Vimana, as it was known, Vimana being a Sanskrit word for celestial craft, was quite a large satellite by the sound, which would carry quite a lot of people from Sri Lanka to the Himalayas. It's fully reported, and elsewhere, no doubt. This isn't new at all, but one thing we know is they are peaceful. If they weren't, we wouldn't be discussing it.
Why are these earthly groups actively suppressing this information, and what is their end game?
I think one of the things with governments is that and they're suppressing it, by the way, as came out in the hearing today, from their own elected representatives. They are lying to and withholding information from Democrat and Republican, and they agree on this cross-party, representatives in America. And may I say, well done, America, by the way, for having a Congress hearing at all. They make Britain look ridiculous. I'm sitting here in London, I'll say that, on this topic, and many other countries look ridiculous. So it's not a criticism of America per se, but they aren't getting to the truth. And so there's some sinister deep state, if you want to use that term. They used to call it the silent group. There is a cover-up. And why do they have it? I can speculate on why they have it. And I think one of the reasons they have it is that they don't know the answer. They know what is happening. They know it's happening. And it's pretty clear now they have retrieved craft. I mean, one was identified by a previous pope, apparently, in Italy. That was revealed in an earlier Congress hearing in the 1930s. I think it was in the hearing. If it wasn't in the hearing, the person who revealed it was certainly in the hearing. And Roosevelt was involved in that craft. And then they say they found non-human beings, intelligences, and so forth. And they're very interested in that. And that's been cited, I was actually told today, in a Senate legislative bill that never got through in full, actually, but involving, again, Rubio, I think, himself, and also Chuck Schumer, so leading figures in both parties. And they named that there are over 20 non-human intelligence types. So I was told today. So this is all known, but they hit a buffer. And it's, again, I think because the security services don't know the answers. They don't know what the end game is. They don't want to panic, as they patronizingly think they will, the public. They don't trust the public. They don't trust their elected representatives even to know these things. They think only they can deal with it. And there's another point too. We know what politicians are like, and all they're looking for is something that's going to help their cause, isn't it? I mean, when's a good day for any politician to come out and say, actually, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have lied to you for decades. That's not a very winning line for a politician.
Well, you're saying that the ETs are friendly, but what about the cattle mutilations, the abductions, and potential hostile encounters?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that people put about, and and also there have been other sort of negative, paranormal. I say negative. You might call it wicked. You might call it. I mean, cattle mutilation's a disgusting thing. There have been evil, wicked things going on this earth of various phenomena of various kinds for centuries. They all, I mean, if you went to England in the 17th century, it'd all be ghosts. And then if you went earlier, it might be imps and various other little demons. And, there are different times. And now they try to attribute all these things to aliens. So I'm not saying none of these things are happening. Some of them are definitely invented. Some of them are lies. They just didn't happen at all, but no doubt some of them did. But it doesn't mean at all that they're aliens. And I certainly don't believe extraterrestrials would come all this way just to mutilate some cattle. That was what they wanted to do. They could take over all the farms on the planet, and they easily.
Well, is it possible that there are some ET groups out there that are malevolent, just like here on this planet?
I would believe that there are. But I would also believe that we are protected. And this is the information Dr. George King received. I mean, he was a master of yoga, and he used spiritual means to receive their communications. So he entered a very, very deep state of trance, not the kind of trance your average medium uses. I'm very familiar with that. I've done mediumship myself for many years. But the level he reached was a whole different caliber than I've come. I wouldn't even put great figures like Blavatsky and Alice Bailey into the same category. Even by what they described, I wouldn't. He was a very advanced medium, which is why they were able to use him. I mean, there are other contactees. I met one or two of them, in their old age, such as Frank Strange's, such as Dan Fry, from that period. I didn't meet Adamski, but none of those have big movements now. I mean, Dr. King founded the Aetherius Society 70 years ago, and we're still going very strong indeed now. And that's because of the depth and the profundity of the knowledge and the information that he gave. So when I quote some of these answers, just to sort of explain, I'm partly basing it on information he received from people from other worlds.
For those out there viewing that are unaware of who Dr. King was, you're saying he was a channeler and a medium, and he channeled the ETs?
He did, at a time when it was not nearly so common, if you like. And it was, I mean, in fact, the mediumship community, who were all in those days doing table rapping and seances and you name it, they didn't much like someone coming along and saying, well, actually, I'm getting messages from other planets. One of the things that marks him out, though, even now, from other claimants, is that he always talked about intelligences in this solar system. He was talking about Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, whereas they were talking, now you often hear like Sirius, Orion, Pleiades. And I think that's partly because people think, well, you can't have life on Mars and Venus and Jupiter and so on. What they mean is we can't live there. What they mean is we can't detect life there, possibly. Doesn't mean there isn't life there. And so he was always very clear right from the beginning, and this really does separate him out from a lot of other claimants, that there is higher life on Mars, which may not even be detectable or visible to us if we were to go there. Just like, and I'm sure you cover this regularly, there is life on this Earth that we can't necessarily detect unless we happen to be clairvoyant, or we happen to have an out-of-body experience, or a near-death experience, or a dream which isn't really a dream, in which we meet one of our relatives who's passed on, and so on and so on and so on. This is how one makes contact with life that you can't physically detect on this Earth. And in the same way, there is higher, but in the case of these planets, much higher life. So they, to come to your question, are protecting us from these hostile aliens that definitely are out there, not in this solar system, but are out there.
Could you compare Dr. King to Edgar Cayce? Would he be similar?
In one way, yes, because they were both great revealers of truths. And Dr. Cayce was a great mystic from what I know. I'm no expert on him, but from what I know, and that some of the things I've heard that he said, I think were spot on. Not going to say all of them, but I think, wow, he was in a way he was ahead of his time. But the distinction I would make with Dr. King, really, with a lot of other people actually, that Dr. King was extremely practical and very focused on tasks, spiritual tasks, but effective tasks which were geared towards service. He wasn't just about information. I think his information is second to none. And I make a point, by the way, of looking into many, many things. And I respect many, many things. I mean, I love some of the things in the old Upanishads and and I love the Tao Te Ching, and there's great truth in the Buddhist Dhammapada, which isn't a million miles from actually true Christianity, and so on. One can go across the board. But with Dr. King, in the end, he was about what do we do to save the world, to change the world. We don't accept predestination or a fate as being unalterable, or dharma, call it whatever you like. We can change our karma.
You said Dr. King created the Aetherius Society. What is that?
So that was the organization that he founded to propagate the teachings he was receiving. And it started, as I say, in 1955. Even before that, he had a small group that he was receiving communications. He had his first contact in 1954. He was told, instructed really by the powers that were using him. In particular, there is one called the Master Aetherius, hence our name. to go public. And he was a shy man. He didn't like the public platform. I knew him very well. I was actually a great friend of his as well. And we were very close, spoke every day, pretty much, for the last 20 years of his life. But he was told to go public in 1955. And that was difficult. I mean, it's quite difficult now, but not like it used to be. He had to go in front of a very conservative, with a small c. These were days when you put a tie on to post a letter. You put a tie on to appear on the JeffMara show, which I haven't done. You have done. But they would put a tie on to, walk down the road.
Right.
We all know what it was like in the 50s, especially over here. And he had to go out there in front of a public audience in Westminster, just down the road from Parliament, and receive in public communications channeled through him, which this wasn't understood at all in those days. So he was a very courageous man, I must say that. And he stuck to his guns through thick and thin. I mean, I was right by his side on many occasions, and I'm absolutely sure he would have done his job, his task, even if he'd been completely alone. He'd have done it. He wasn't. He had always had people around him. Some came, some went, some stayed. But he still was absolutely resilient and determined. As I say, focused above all else on service.
Well, you've been at this since the 70s. Have they tried to silence you?
Yeah, I've experienced the cover-up absolutely, very clearly. I actually had quite a rude awakening when before I worked professionally, or if you like to use the word, for Dr. King, before I was secretary of the Aetherius Society. I was a school teacher, and there was a Russian, cutting it really briefly to give a summary of this. It's explained fully in some of my books, but in brief, there was a Russian atomic accident in 1957. They've now said, they tied the date down, and it's a place called Kishtim. And this hadn't been revealed. This had not been released. And then some nuclear releases started to be detected in 1958. And some stories were breaking out in the press a little bit, but it wasn't big news, and various theories about weapons testing and so on. And then Dr. King got a detailed description in a communication from another planet, which he published in a journal called Cosmic Voice, about what had happened, that there'd been an accident in a nuclear power station. This wasn't known. It's a research establishment, really, and it is known now. And it was not released for 18 years. And then it was released by Dr. Zores Medvedev, who came to London and released it. And it got on the front page of papers, and it was in a magazine, a very serious journal called The New Scientist in UK, and they published it. So I could show, it was published as a scoop by this journal, The New Scientist. I could prove that we published the essential details of that, including numbers killed and injured, as a result of a channeled communication from another planet in 1958. I say we, I mean, I wasn't around then, but we, the Aetherius Society. And it was provable because you have to register all your journals with the British Museum Library. It was there, they could see it, and they couldn't really dispute it. And I went along to the BBC, and I did an interview for the 1 o'clock news on a nationwide radio show about this. And they said to me, if you can get this verified by Dr. Medvedev, you have proved that your society is genuine. So I went hunting for Dr. Medvedev, and I found him. He was at a university, actually lecturing. And he kindly did an interview with me, which I got on a tape and took it back to the BBC. I was like an amateur journalist for the day. And they got it. And then the show was due to go out, I think, at 6 o'clock, because they were waiting for this. It didn't go out. I took it, I showed it to them. It didn't, I might have my timings wrong, but it was on the same day. It didn't come out. And I phoned them up. I said, well, I mentioned the name of the journalist. I said, I met so-and-so. He did this interview. Can I speak to him? They said, there was no one of that name here. I mean, I'd met him earlier in the day. I said, what do you mean there's no one of that name here? I mean, I just met him. Well, no, maybe he was a temp. He was interviewing me in a studio and recording the interview. And the whole thing went dead. And that's when I had like first-hand experience. It never came out, by the way. And the story never came out until April the 27th, I'll never forget, 1978. The New Scientist were forced to publish in a tiny paragraph that they had been scooped by a UFO. And they did do that. And people can check that out. They can find that. It was, it was proof of Dr. King's contacts, but also you could see the cover-up at work. And then I got to know the cover-up quite well. And this is a time, of course, that people will find very odd now, especially young people, when most people believed in governments, especially over here anyway. If you went out on a public platform, as I did, and you said that the government is lying to you, they could boo you, literally. Or they could certainly laugh at you. Oh, you're a conspiracy nutter, you know. Now, if I went out now, Jeff, I said, governments tell you the truth, I'd be laughed at and booed, probably. But then people still believed in them. I actually went, I got proof of another case, which was a nuclear accident, because that's one of the things Dr. King and cosmic intelligences were really concerned about, still are, but were really concerned about in that period when nuclear research was very, very irresponsible. And they were warning, not just through Dr. King, actually, but they were giving those warnings. And they warned about an accident in a nuclear power station called Windscale over here. It's now called Sellafield. And when Dr. King got it, he wrote to every member of parliament and informed them of this. They denied there was any casualties at all, and so on and so on. And then the years go by, the decades go by. The leukemia incident, one of the things he warned about is the connection with cancer and nuclear radiation. And the incident of leukemia was way above the national average and so on. And then I took this finding, some of the things he'd said back in 57, in print, were confirmed. So I took this to a big national newspaper in London. And I'll never forget it, because they were some of the most honest journalists that I've ever met, actually. This was like the editorial board of a newspaper. It's called the Today newspaper. It doesn't exist now. They're probably too nice to still exist. I don't know. That may not be true. But I was talking to them, and I remember them saying to me, one of them said to me, "What do you want from us, Richard?" He said, "We're not here to tell the truth. We're here to tell the truth that our readers want to read." And I've never forgotten that. That was quite an honest thing for him to tell me. And I think that's very true of the media in general. But what I would say is I think sometimes they get their readers wrong, and they underestimate the interest their readers have in stories like this.
Have you personally witnessed a UFO?
Yeah, several, actually. I haven't been in one. And I haven't, I don't claim contact with intelligences from other planets. But yes, I've had a number of UFO sightings. But I do look I'll tell you an interesting one, actually. This is very interesting to me. We had Dr. King had a rally in a place called Trafalgar Square, which would, I don't know what the equivalent would be there. It'd be like somewhere in Washington, D.C., some big political place where lots of people gather. Anyway, it's a big square in London. And he had a rally for the truth. He was demanding the truth from governments in 1958 and saying that they were lying and holding this rally. We went to that very square and did some film footage about that rally, I think 65 years afterwards. So what would that be? 2023, I guess. And we did some film footage, we put it out. And this was, in those days, they were called flying saucers always. There was flying saucers and cigar-shaped objects. Those were the two that were generally seen. I actually noticed today in the Congress hearing, there was talk of a triangular object. And that's interesting because you do get more shapes. And actually, the master ethereist did prophesy that would happen in the 70s. And since, again, imprint, and since then, there have been much more varying descriptions of craft. But in those days, it was very much the flying saucer, disc-shaped object. You know, we're going back to 1947 and George Adamski and all of that. So that's what he was doing. We had this thing, we spent the day filming, we put out a clip somewhere, I didn't, but the team here did, and that was that. That evening, my wife and I went out for a walk, and in London, just where we live, and we saw a flying saucer. Because very often you'll see it might be a bright light in a sky, it might disappear, it might have a flight pattern. Obviously, you've got to look, is it a meteorite? You know, could it be all the things that they say, is it a drone, etc.? Is it a satellite? There's lots of those in the sky, Earth satellites. You've got to eliminate all those things. But this was your classic flying saucer-shaped object going across the sky that night. And the two other people who'd helped me make this footage on that day both had sightings quite separately, not with me, that night. Now, we're all pretty skeptical, believe it or not, about sightings, because we know there's a lot of false claims out there. So that was a very interesting sighting, Jeff. But you know, I've had quite a few, and I find very often they are connected to the work that we do. You know, if we're out there telling the truth about UFOs, if we're out there putting out the message, there's an old saying, actually, that Dr. King used to quote: you take one step towards them and they will take two steps towards you. So there is a reciprocation for sure.
If there are craft out there that are ours, how can we tell the difference between a real UFO and, you know, a rebuild?
So I think by their, as I mentioned earlier, their technology, I mean, they have many capabilities. I mean, if I could just go back to this book, Contacts with the Gods from Space, and what was published in it, some of the things that Dr. King itemized in there was their ability to, well, I won't read from the book, I'll just tell you, to take off at tremendous speeds in a way that, according to experts who have testified from the US Navy, from the US Air Force, and so on, no craft on Earth is able to do, to replicate. They are able to move at fantastic velocities, and they have a gravitational control that no craft here has. Another thing they have is the power of invisibility. The term used by governments is signature. They don't have a signature. So they can disappear, they can control they can have radar detection, which happens if they choose to, and not if they don't choose to. So I mentioned earlier, they can go through the sound barrier without a sonic boom. These are all recorded abilities, but I think the main one is their powers. Now, my interest, above all else, isn't, you know, the general, what you might call ufology. My main interest is the spiritual mission of these craft. And there is a spacecraft we know about through Dr. King called Satellite Number 3. And that craft comes into orbit at certain dates. It's in orbit right now. It comes in not to be seen, not to sort of satisfy people's curiosity. It comes in to empower spiritual action. And by cooperating with it, you can feel its power. Now, one of the things I would say, and I certainly think Dr. King thought this too, is that the best way to prove things is to prove things like this, is to prove them to yourself internally. It's not the only way. There's objective proof. But no matter what, I found this with psychic powers. I do a lot on psychic powers. I run events on psychic powers. I ran one a few days ago. People came along to it, and they were having tangible, definite experiences. They were finding out that they could tell someone they had never met before. We had about 100 people, just over 100 people here. A lot of them completely new to this. They could tell a complete stranger detailed things about their life that they had never heard, they had no way of knowing at all. Now, a complete cynic, a debunker, whatever, can come in and say, well, actually, you checked them out, you looked into it, all of that nonsense. Or they can just say it was a big coincidence. Even though science accepts statistical evidence, when it suits them, they can say, oh, well, no, that's... But however, my point here is that the person who did that, who came to this event, they know they didn't check it out. They know how they felt when they were able to get this information. And they knew it was a different feeling than they had in another state of consciousness. Just like, we know when we're remembering something as opposed to imagining something, you get to know your own internal consciousness. And that, I believe, is the best proof. So just to finish on satellite number 3, it potentizes spiritual actions such as prayer, such as good works, such as selfless counseling, good counseling, all kinds of actions, actually, charitable actions and so forth, are all more powerful when this is in orbit, and people who know about this can feel that difference.
Well, how do we cooperate with it so we can feel it?
Right. Well, the way to do that is to coin a phrase, to sensitize ourselves. I mean, the whole process of evolution, in a way, and this is something that the master Aetherius said, actually. In fact, he said this before the society was founded. He said this in 1954 through Dr. King, and it was written down in a healing circle that Dr. King had in those days. But he said that the whole process of evolution is one of sensitization of ourselves. As we go through experiences, and as particularly when we do spiritual exercises of a whole variety of kinds, there isn't just one path, that there's Ramakrishna, the great saint, the Hindu saint, he knew that. He knew that they all lead to the same destination in the end. He had this wonderful parable about taking an Indian boy, well, it was India, he was in India, that's why it was an Indian boy, but into contact with an elephant who'd never seen an elephant. In fact, 4 boys blindfolded who'd never seen an elephant, touching the elephant in one place, one a trunk, one the leg, one the side, and then giving a description of what they touch. You get 4 different descriptions. He said, yes, and those are the religions, but God is the whole elephant, and they're just touching different aspects of it. And it's more than all the religions by far, and mystical paths. So as we go through life, as particularly if we take to a path using spiritual exercises, of which I would rate prayer, true prayer, not selfish prayer, not dogmatic prayer, confined to any just one particular religion, but prayer for others, I would give that as the best possible way to sensitize ourselves. But there are many, many others. Breathing exercises, psychic development, mantra is a wonderful, wonderful practice we can all do. And as we do so, then we'll become more attuned to something like satellite number 3, and actually more attuned to life in general. And we'll also evolve ourselves.
Can you give us a practical example, at least like a mantra?
Well, I'll tell you what I would like to do, if I may. I'd like to give you an affirmation.
Okay.
And this is in the English language. And it's a very powerful one. And it's quite long. So people might want to write. I'll say it a bit slowly in case somebody wants to write this down. And it's this: I am the divine presence which is creating perfection throughout my whole life. I am the divine presence which is creating perfection throughout my whole life. And you can say that, you can think that to yourself. One thing it will do, by the way, it will give you inner confidence. And we all need that sometimes, because it's based on something real. It's based on one of the greatest truths you'll find anywhere. It's a universal truth that the spark of God, the I am presence, if you like, is within all of us. It's our highest potential. And by doing a practice like that, also, you'll start to gain contact with your own higher self. And this is the problem that human beings suffer. Then we're not in contact as much as we should be. I don't say that morally. I just say that as a natural principle with our higher selves.
Do you think ETs can contact us through dreams?
I think they can, for sure. Yes, if they choose to, they can. Not only ETs, by the way, great beings. In fact, it's more likely, I would say, to be a higher being from this world in a dream. But it's certainly not impossible for it to be ET.
Well, it's fascinating that you use the word sensitizing because perhaps over the last year or so, I occasionally will get a dream with some sort of ET in it. And in the beginning, or at least the first time it happened, it was really spooky for me and it woke me up. But I've become sensitized to it now and accepting where it doesn't bother me.
Do you know that's really interesting? Because do you think, it's not for me to say, I used to do dream interpreting, by the way, on the radio, just to give you a little heads up on Radio London, but BBC. But first of all, I think that psychologists in general, and psychiatrists in general, are missing out. Not all, maybe not Carl Jung, but a lot of them are missing out on an aspect of mind because they refer to the conscious mind and the unconscious mind generally. And the unconscious mind should be split into two categories, which are very, very different. So one is the subconscious, which is our memory and our natural, reflexes and so forth, our internal structure and system. And the other is the superconscious. So what can happen in a dream? I think the most difficult question I ever had on the radio actually was a woman. It was up in Manchester actually, and she said to me that she had a dream that her newborn child was going to die. And it was a nightmare. And she woke up in the morning in a terrible state and then found out that the child had died. Was alive and was relieved, but 2 weeks later it died. Now, she said to me, why did I have that dream? Because it didn't stop it dying. This was a real, this is an impossible question for me to answer. But I just said to her, because she was asking, I said, did you find this terrible thing happen? Did you find the fact that you'd been through that nightmare in your dream in any way prepared you so that when it actually happened, it was even somehow a bit less of a shock, at least initially? Because who's going to ever get over that? And she said, actually, yes. So that was her answer. So I sometimes think dreams are there to prepare us. And in your case, it may be, yes, I think sensitized is spot on. I think that is the word. But also maybe it's preparing you in some way for your role so that in general, you're kind of more at ease with the whole subject of extraterrestrial life.
What you're saying makes good sense.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's the most undeniable piece of evidence that UFOs are real?
I mentioned earlier that I think the best proof we could get is from within. But I'll put that aside for this question then, if I may. So as a researcher, I think one of the most interesting and undeniable cases of a UFO landing, I don't mean cases of proof of Dr. King, because if I was talking about proof of Dr. King's contacts, the most undeniable case would be around Chernobyl, because I was with him. I'll come back to that if I may, if you're interested. But in terms of just some information that's come to me, I think when Gorbachev, if you remember Gorbachev, was president of the Soviet Union, he tried a thing called glasnost, and he tried to open up and be honest about some of the things which had been hidden before. And one of the things they opened up about was UFOs for a while. It didn't last very long. So this would be about 1989. And I think it came out in about 1990. The full details, as I say, are in my UFO book. But he came up with, or they came up and revealed, this is the Soviet agency TASS, as it was known. I've been in touch, I was actually in touch with TASS in Moscow from London about this, because I was the first person to put this out in the media over here in the UK. And they revealed this case. And what this case was, that a UFO had landed in a park in a place called Voronezh, and that's I think it's 600 miles from Moscow, but anyway, wherever it is, it's a park in a town in Russia. And there was a crowd of people there. A UFO came down and landed in front of this crowd, and a being stepped out of the crowd. Out of the UFO, out of the craft. And there was a boy in the crowd who was frightened and started to cry. As he did so, this being pointed what appeared to be a gun or something like it at the boy, and the boy disappeared. Now, this is a TASS report out of Russia. I will say, TASS were absolutely shocked by the Western media over this, because I spoke to them. There they were, revealing this with the spirit of glasnost, openness, I think is the translation of it, and the Western media were pathetic, as usual, especially then, cynical, debunking, ignoring the usual stuff. Anyway, the being then got back into the craft. The craft flew off, leaving indentations in the ground of the park, and then the boy reappeared, and the boy was fine. So that's a case, I say it's in one of my books, I think was, in terms of reports of UFO activity, because I think there are many things in there, the power of invisibility. It turns out it was a compassionate move because the boy was then fine. It also shows their powers, what they could do if they meant harm. They obviously didn't mean harm. And the whole crowd, I think about 30 people, saw them and witnessed it. It was published quite openly in the local press. That was a very good case, indeed, in terms of UFO activity.
While we're on the topic of Russia, did you also notice in the hearing today that George Knapp smuggled some sort of report out of Russia? What is that about?
I was very interested in that because he was, again, talking about the same period, which was the 80s, wasn't he? And that somehow he'd got access to some of these things. I wasn't clear how, but he's a journalist, isn't he? And he'd got hold of it and changed the documentation slightly and then come out and released it. And he had, it seemed, seemingly, from what I could hear, has some sensational findings from Russia. And this is across the board. I mean, there's also UFO things going on in China. The government's into it. There's an equivalent. They don't do open hearings in China, of course, but there's an equivalent department. The department in America now is very sinister. AARO it's called. And they seem to be withholding information from, as I mentioned, congressmen, but also in Russia. This is quite across the board. In fact, there's a man who came out who was head of the space agency in Israel not that long ago, about 5 years ago, and said that they knew full well, and that Trump knew full well, about UFOs, UFO contacts, and that he also said that there's an existence of a galactic federation, and so on. So there's so many cases going on. But yeah, I did notice what you mentioned there about George Knapp, yes.
Do you think disclosure is really up to the ETs rather than our governments or the governments on the planet?
I don't. Quite the opposite, actually. I think they are going way above and beyond what we could possibly expect from them. I mean, here we are, an extremely backward race. I mean, here we have a race based on footage which you and I saw this very day, where we fire a missile at them. There's other evidence of us firing missiles at them. We lie about them. We're hostile to them. We put them into our Ministry of Defense or our Pentagon or some war department, while at the same time saying that they don't exist. And I think they still keep coming, and they've kept on coming for thousands and thousands of years. They're all the way through the Bible, all the way through. I mean, Ezekiel is a great case, but so is the Star of Bethlehem. That's no star. If you believe in it, that's no star at all. The star can't hover over a stable, and so on. This is right across the board, and I think it's totally 100% our responsibility to reveal it. It's not theirs. They're doing all they can in a very subtle way to bring about a change, and the people they're interested in, I think, are ordinary, so-called ordinary people. I think they know the limitations of governments. They know the motives of governments of all kinds. and they know that they don't take up, and the Vatican and other organizations have not taken up the opportunities they could have done. Every religious leader on earth should have a statement to make about extraterrestrial life, be they Christian, Buddhist, or any other religion. They should have an answer to this. This is the biggest issue facing us. Right now, I'm here in Britain, and this thing that you and I saw today, the thing we're talking about now, should be on the front pages of every paper. What is on the front pages of every paper is how Prince Harry is getting on with Prince William. That's what people are interested in. That tells us, and I'm not criticizing either of those princes particularly at the moment, but I'm just saying that tells us the mentality of humanity. It's a petty matter. It's not our business, and it won't change the world. But extraterrestrials will.
Well, do you think this is a dangerous place for ETs to come to?
Not for them.
Not for them?
Because as I mentioned earlier, they've got force fields around their craft. They're way ahead of us. There was one US Navy report, actually, that they not only did they see a craft, which was traveling through the different domains it was going through. They can go through water, land, air. And this craft was set on a particular course, and it was going to get there at a certain time. This jet, this American US Navy jet, it saw a craft as it did so. That craft then beetled off, as it were, or sped off, and arrived at the very destination that this US jet was headed for before the jet got there, at top velocity. It was demonstrating to it many things there. It was demonstrating, one, its capabilities were greater, but also it knew mentally what that jet, where it was going. Now, this is a report it's come out of the US Navy, or by whistleblowers, or however it's come out. So no, they're not threatened by us. I mean, that missile, Hellfire missile, this tremendous weapon that the Americans have, which no doubt other countries either have or aspire to as well in this world, this backward, hostile world, which is crazy. I mean, it's mad. I mean, war is insanity. It's a definition of insanity. And so they come to a mad world. They're looking at they don't have wars on Venus or Mars or Jupiter. They wouldn't do that. That's ridiculous and savage. It's a very savage planet we live on, sadly. But they come here to help us. They come here because they're interested in our well-being, and they've sent to our world their agents. And this is a controversial point, Jeff, so stand by. But some of the agents they've sent to our world have been born on this world. In Hindu, they're called, in Hindu religion, they're known as avatars. Gods, if you like, born through the womb of earth people. And some of them include Jesus, virgin birth, Krishna, Buddha, Lao Tse, Hercules, Confucius. I could go on. These are some of the great spiritual figures of history. Moses. I mean, Moses was followed by UFOs on his whole journey, by day and by night. They're fully recorded. In fact, he was taken up Mount Sinai in a cloud. I mean, you try traveling in a cloud. I mean, the descriptions that we have are pathetic, really. I mean, unidentified flying objects, okay, they're actually identified. It should be IFOs. That's the whole point. If they're unidentified, we wouldn't be talking about them. But there you go. But flying saucers was ridiculous. Although when I wrote my book, I did a lot of research, and I found an 11th century sighting in Japan, which was described as a flying earthenware pot. So even that wasn't new.
Why don't they just land at Piccadilly Circus and say, hey,
Exactly.
we're here?
Exactly. And this is where these are psychologists, and they know the effect of such things. I'm not saying that'll never happen, by the way. I'm not saying it'll be Piccadilly Circus either, but the Hollywood Bowl or whatever you like to say, they could do that easily. They are psychologists. They know the reaction it will have. I mean, let's face it, they know they'll probably receive hostile fire if they did something like that. which wouldn't affect them. Probably that Hellfire missile was like some pebble. You're driving a car and a pebble hits the car. That's all that was to them. Just nothing. It's laughable from their point of view. However, they will pick their time, and this will happen, but the change has to come from us. And this is a thing which I would put under the category of karma. We have to change our karma. We have to be ready for such things to happen. And when we change, and this show is changing karma right now. The thoughts that go out, not just to people who watch and listen, but even onto the mind belt. These thoughts will change the mind belt around Earth. That's an ancient mystical piece of knowledge. And people who study great truths, if they study a book, and I'll name a couple that I would recommend. One's called The 12 Blessings, another is called The 9 Freedoms. Those are two of the great publications of the Aetherius Society, but there are many others. If you study the Tao Te Ching, or if you study the Dhammapada, or some other great spiritual work, the Mahabharata, if you like, you are putting those thoughts, those seeds of thought, into the ethers around Earth, because mind is a force. And this you can prove, as I mentioned. We proved it, I prove it all the time in psychic workshops that I run, and so do many others. You can feel it's tangible, it exists. And how many people, there's going to be people watching us right now, Jeff, who've used this phrase, I picked up your thought. Telepathy. I can feel your vibe. Telepathy. I've got a feeling you're going somewhere. Telepathy, and so on. There is a sea of mind. So putting out thoughts like this is not just a study, it is also service.
Would you say in this sea of mind, information about everything is there?
Yes,
because
I would.
Some of my near-death experiencers find themselves in some realm where they know everything, but they can't bring it back with them.
Yes. And I bet some of them didn't want to come back, at least briefly.
Most of them don't want to come back.
Exactly. No, it's an interesting thing. But they were right to come back, because this realm that we're on is very, very, very important. It may not feel like it. It's extremely basic and very primitive. But to come to your question, yes, all knowledge is available, and you can enter a state of consciousness in which all knowledge comes to you. And it's just and actually it's above conscious thought. If you're in that state, and you don't have to have a near-death experience to do this, by the way. You can enter a deep, deep state of meditation called samadhi, and it takes practice. It's not going to happen overnight, or even a lower state than that, actually. But you can start to get to a point where you go beyond the normal conscious thinking process. And when you do, you start to tap all mind. I mean, actually, you can, by tuning into another person, you can know things that they haven't told you. And it's because you're tapping into all mind that you can go to a place and you can feel that this is a sad place. I'm sensing death, or I'm sensing, and then you look into the history and it's confirmed. So it's all embedded in a sea of mind, and you absolutely can tap into it, and you can use it in service to help people more, because often people don't tell you what they're really thinking or what they're really feeling. Maybe they can't. Maybe they don't know themselves. But if you have that ability, you can start to tap into it, and everybody can develop that ability. That's why I call my book Unlock Your Psychic Powers, and everybody can do it.
The main ET that Dr. King channeled is called Master Aetherius.
Well, there are three main ones, but there's two really regular ones. So the Master Aetherius is his most regular communicator. He's a wonderful, wonderful intelligence indeed, and given tremendous wisdom. Another one is called Mars Sector 6. These are really like code names, you might say. And he gave this teaching called The 9 Freedoms, which is my favorite book in the world. And also we have these things on audio. We have an audio cloud library. If you go to etherius.org, you'll see we have an audio cloud library, and you can subscribe to it, and you can tap into these things, and you can hear the original transmission as it was given through Dr. King, the overshadowing of him in samadhic trance. And he mastered yoga like no one I've ever met. No one I've ever met or come across. I mean, I look into people and I respect them, like the great Ramana Maharshi, like Yogananda, like others. But Dr. King was, to me, in a league of his own. He didn't make that comparison. It's something I would say. And so you can hear these things. And the other one is the Master Jesus. And he gave a teaching called the 12 Blessings. Jesus is not the one and only Son of God. No, sorry, I don't want to offend anybody. I respect your beliefs if that's what you believe. But it's the one and only bit that is problematic with any religion, actually. There are multiple paths to God, but the greatest one is the one that gives the greatest service to all.
You said that the Master Aetherius gave prophecies. Are there any prophecies that are still out there that haven't come true yet? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I don't think I said that, but it's fine because he did. So maybe we wrote that to you. Well, he did prophesy the coming new age. So in a nutshell, what we have is a very dangerous time on Earth now. And I think that's pretty obvious to us. And he said that it would happen, and it's happening. And he talked about the tests and the battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, which has happened, which is happening. I mean, let's not run away with the idea the deep state is all on this realm, or the idea that all the great saints are on this realm either. You have them, I'm sad to say, you have dark forces on lower realms. They're called dark, you could call them negative if you prefer. And you have forces of light on higher realms. And these have much more influence over what happens here than any politician, let's put it that way, and most financiers as well, for that matter. But this battle is ongoing, and so there's a very dark period, a time of natural catastrophe. This is one of the things that the Aetherius Society is really working on. I mean, for example, last week, we send out energy, spiritual energy, to try and counter the effects of natural disasters. And we do get results. And in the contacts with the gods from space, I list some of those results. We do it in cooperation with higher powers. One higher power, just to name one from this Earth, who's helped us with our various missions, is known as Count Saint Germain. Very well-known figure, very misunderstood, a lot of false claims about him, but also some true ones. But in a nutshell, the Master Aetherius prophesied this dangerous time. But then he said that after this time will come a great and glorious new age. The new age has been misunderstood. It got hippified and turned into some sort of massive love-in or something. It's not that. It is a true love-in in the sense of real love, cosmic love, if you like, love energy, but it will come. And it will be all about the Mother Earth. And to be specific, the Master Aetherius prophesied a time when we will be able to overcome death in the way that we have death, because reincarnation, as we have it, and death is necessary, but on other planets they don't have it in this solar system. They don't need it. And he's talked of a time when people will actually be born through the flame of the planet, the Mother Earth herself. So she is the most important aspect of our future, the Mother Earth. And the ancient Greeks were right when they put Gaia at the top of their pantheon.
Other people claim to channel Saint Germain. Is this the same being that you're speaking of?
Probably not, because I'm sorry to say, I mean, I'm not going to rule it out, by the way, at all. I'm not going to say none of the contacts are genuine at all. No doubt some are, but a lot aren't. And people latch on. He's one of those that people have latched on to. But, you know, he is a great influence. He's been on Earth. He lived on Earth for hundreds of years in a physical body. He's an ascended master. He's not from another planet. He's from this planet. He could be, but he's chosen to stay here. and help us is a wonderful intelligence indeed. I do think, though, to come to your question, it's difficult for people because there are so many claims out there. And if you like, I'm making another one. And I don't just expect people to take my word for anything I'm saying to you. Don't take my word for it, please. Check it out, look into it, test it. And the very best way to test it is within yourself. Try the 12 blessings as a practice and see whether it works in your life. And it will.
You say that the best way to escape the deep state is to experience the deep state within you. What do you mean by this?
That was a soundbite. That was well, if we go within us, because sometimes, we are conditioned, and we're conditioned by, to universities. I mean, it's good that a lot more people are going to universities in some ways, but universities are all about critical thinking, aren't they? And yes, it's a useful thing. I certainly don't think we should throw out logic and the ability to think critically and so on at all. Some New Age people do throw it out. I think they're wrong. I think we need that attribute, but there are higher attributes than this. And the higher attributes are intuitive, and they are not taught. And so we are conditioned to reject. I'll give you an example. You can get a high-powered academic, or maybe a high-powered businessman or sportsman or whatever, or sportswoman, whatever they may be, but someone who's capable of great degrees of concentration. If you concentrate intensely on something for long enough and intensively enough and single-mindedly enough, you will start to gain psychic impressions just by that act of concentration. And they must then be gaining it. But because they're conditioned that psychic impressions are false, they don't exist. They don't accept the superconscious mind. They only accept the subconscious mind. They don't know about the capabilities of higher intuition and psychic ability. Then they think that what's happening to them is their imagination. So they dismiss it. They get an impression, but they dismiss it. Oh, that's just my imagination. Some of the great scientists haven't done that. And Isaac Newton, who was an alchemist, actually, more than he was a scientist in some ways, although alchemy is a science, he was very avid alchemist. So he was able to watch a tree fall into the ground and say and realize it was gravity. Many people have seen a tree fall to the ground and not realized it was gravity. It's a state of consciousness that you enter through these practices. And that's the problem with our educational structure. It's limited. It's not all wrong, but it's limited. And so is our world. And our world is focused on materialism. And you're encouraged to dismiss things. And as I said earlier, people are more interested to know about, a couple of celebrities and what they're up to than they are to know about the truth of extraterrestrial civilization, lest they watch the JeffMara podcast or the Spiritual Freedom Show or something like that. But there are many other ways, but people are blocking off. They are conditioned to block off. And what I meant by my statement about the deep state within, as we go within and start to realize all knowledge is within us, and we have these higher powers, these superconscious abilities, we'll break free from that conditioning.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Spiritual Freedom Show, which is your podcast. How can people check it out?
Well, they can search for the Spiritual Freedom Show. It's available on, I think, all the usual places, Spotify and so on. We have a channel they can get to. They can come to my website, richardlawrence.co.uk, and connect to it through that. And they'll be very, very welcome indeed, and check out what we've got there.
You have a YouTube channel, right?
It is the Spiritual Freedom Show, yes.
Oh, okay. You don't have a separate one under your name?
I don't have one under my name, but the Aetherius Society UK does. And it's very interesting, actually. On there, by the way, right now, so it's Facebook, Aetherius Society UK. Ayab Malik, who runs that particular Facebook site, he's put up quite an interesting posting about UFOs and the UAP hearings and so on, which you'll find there if you happen to go there now.
What does the post-disclosure world look like to you?
Heaven. It's disclosure and acceptance, and I'm going to add another word in: cooperation. We got to go to the next stage, and this is why I mentioned that Dr. King was so practical, and this marks him out from some other great teachers like Casey and even some of the theosophists and so on. It was still often in the realms of theory and knowledge and study. and hopefully wisdom. But with Dr. King, it's practical. And I think the post-disclosure world will move beyond, do they exist? Even why are they here? To how can we cooperate with them? And when we do that, then they'll come closer. Then we'll have the landing you mentioned, wherever it may be, whether it's Piccadilly Circus or the Hollywood Bowl or wherever it is, they will then come closer. But we have to prove that we are willing to cooperate actively with them and save our own planet. It's not their job to save our planet. They're doing it, but it's our job to do it, and to do it in cooperation with the gods from space.
Now that AI is coming online, what role do you think it will have with ETs?
That's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm no expert, Jeff, on this at all. So I couldn't really possibly say, except it's a good way of, I suppose, communicating these things, as long as it's done truthfully. There are dangers, I suppose, with it as well, aren't there, of falsifying information too. And that is a problem. But if it's used in a good way, as a teaching method, maybe, you might know better than me on that one, Jeff.
Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. That's a good point. Well, Richard, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
I'd like to leave us with a message that I just touched on there, that the whole process of existence is a process of sensitization, that we go through experiences. Dr. King came up with a really good statement, and I'm going to apologize in advance because it's very wordy, but it's actually brilliant if you really think about it. He said, too many people are having too much experience to experience the way experience should be experienced. Shall I say that again, Jeff? Too many people are having too much experience to experience the way experience should be experienced. And I'll simplify it. The idea of experience is not like some gigantic bucket list, or we're to do all the things we think we want to do and so on. No, the idea of experience, it can be extremely elating. The natural state it should be a state of peace. The natural state within people should be a state of happiness. That's the natural state. It's not always there. If it was always there, there'd be something wrong with us, because we'd be very cold-hearted people who weren't affected by the suffering of others, which is all around us. So I'm not suggesting you'll be like that all the time, but that is our natural state. As we go through experiences, the idea is to wrest from them the lessons, and more than lessons, the sensitization we need. And as we do this, we evolve. And this evolution is our journey back to God. And yet that God is within us all the time, because it's the I am presence. It is the divine presence which is creating perfection throughout our whole life.
Richard, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.